Hello and welcome, listeners. My name is Lauren Renee, and I am here today with my dear friend Octavia Carney. And we have a beautiful collaboration between both of our podcasts today, mine being The Visionary Vortex and hers being Planet Medicine. And Octavia had been featured on my podcast, The Visionary Vortex, before. And they're always amazing episodes with her astrology updates. And there's just this magical flow that happens between us in the way that we really tune into the visions and the current energies and what's happening. And then Octavia just brings her really deep astrology wisdom to the table. And so we are looking forward to bringing this episode through to you today. We're really just going to tune into what's happening across this week as we're moving into Leo season and the astrological energies and themes that we're really dropping into for the weeks and months ahead, wherever that may take us. So yeah, thank you for being here, Octavia, and thank you for having me on your podcast as well as joining me for mine once again.
Oh yeah, thank you for the introduction. It's always a treat to co-create with you in whatever form it takes. So I'm excited that we were able to line this up, especially being on opposite ends of the earth now. It took a bit of some patience, and this is something we're going to delve into more on this episode. And just kind of working away at aligning the time and the space to be able to do it. So it feels really special to be here.
Yeah, and it always does seem to align perfectly when we do get the hit about these collaborations. It's like one of us thinks about it, the other person has kind of already been feeling doing an episode. And yeah, it's really beautiful the way that our energies and what we bring through really activates each other. So yeah, I really love to be that transmission with you for the listeners about the power of collaboration. And when you're feeling something but it's not entirely there, it's like sometimes there's just someone else that just weaves so beautifully in your life that can help bring that message through that's wanting to drop in. So
yes, yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that we're in a moment where it's just so valuable to remember that we don't have to do it all alone, and that there is always that option to reach out and have a sort of collaborative or cooperative approach to things, even and especially when it feels like it may be impossible to do that. It is, in fact, still possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's okay to be supported. It's like I always love to bring back, even on this podcast, like the Visionary Vortex, we're really talking about this idea of how we bring visions into creations. It's like remembering the visions, and even just the idea to do a podcast episode, even if that's not clear for us, it's like, okay, is there someone else that's here to support in this vision? And I think that's often a question that a lot of people really miss asking themselves. There's always this mindset in the world of we've got to do everything that we want to do alone. But yeah, I think opening up to that in a way, like it's one of the first things I always think of. So it's a very powerful thought to open this with.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And bringing it back to this idea of, because that is so entrenched in patriarchy and in capitalism, in this individualistic sort of framework that we've all been conditioned so deeply to align with. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's fine to have these these parts, these influences within ourselves that drive us and get things done on our own terms. But there's also just so much available when we can just loosen the grip on that a little and remember to just ask.
And yeah, there was something there you said that really like relates, to what we're going to go more into soon, which is already revealing itself, but surrendering to the pace of things that need to happen. Because when you are bringing in other people, as we mentioned, it's like, yeah, you have to let go of that control of the pace that you feel like it needs to happen, and just trust in the pace of the collaborative field and what that needs, and knowing that it's okay if things are a little bit slower because they're going to be coming through in the most aligned way at the exact right time. So delays aren't
Yeah.
necessarily a bad thing.
Yes, that's so true. And, being able to slow down is, it's a lifelong practice. And it's definitely not something that's like you don't just master it one day, patience.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I think once being able to just slow down and see that opportunity and that cooperative dimension of things that can open up. Because when we just go so fast all the time, I heard someone say once that it's impossible to be kind when you're in a hurry.
Mm.
And I really think there's something to that. I mean, there's just so much available, when we slow down and we can actually see beyond just the obstacle. And there are, to be sure, so many obstacles that we're all facing right now. And I'm reminded of this is just coming in the Hindu deity, Ganesha,
Mm.
the placer and remover of obstacles, the elephant that's just this like playful deity that's just like, wait, no, not here. But yeah, sure. Yeah, you can go this way, but not that way. But okay, you can actually go this way now too, sort of thing. And, it's the planets are similar. This is like this universal archetype of being put on a path and having things blocked from us for a higher reason, a higher purpose, and being able to do whatever it is we need to do to remember that possibility and to remember that, there is more that we can't see, that we can trust in at this time.
Mm. Yeah, I think I kind of had this awareness, years ago, even when I was working corporate in London, and if I ever had delays on the way to work, I'd just be like, oh, trust, it's just what it's meant to be. But then you get into that workplace, it's like, why are you 15 minutes late? What happened? And it's like, it's just these little
Yes,
simple things, but I'm
that's
here right on
exactly right.
time. In my
Mm.
in my and I think there's always that one person in your friendship groups that's just known as the person that can always be a little bit late. I tend to be one of them, and it's like,
Yeah.
I actually don't think it's anything about my wounding or psyche or anything like that. I just always feel like no matter what, I'm right on time.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. I
Yeah.
hear you.
Mm.
Yeah, trusting that pace.
Yeah.
And I can feel myself slowing down so much more than I used to as well, to the point that even like I've been reconnecting with my family recently here in the States, and I was even my dad like pointed it out that I like to go slower with things than he does, which is so funny. And he's like a bit impatient with me sometimes. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I should really speed up. Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, I
But
feel
yeah, it's a radical idea, a radical way to live for sure.
And one thing is, for each of us as individuals is to remember we all have our own pace, and that pace gets to
Mm.
change at different seasons of our life. That's
Oh
one
yeah.
been a huge lesson for me, even this year in 2022. It's like, I think a couple of months ago or so, I just had this sudden realization of like, oh, I can't put myself in a box of like, I'm showing up at this time on this day every single
Yeah.
day consistently. It's like I can, in my pace, and the way that I've grown to know myself is I can take, 2 weeks off here and there and just go really slow, and then suddenly I'll be back on, and it's like I'll just quantum leap time and create, what would take some people to create like 6 months in, and I'll do it in a week because then suddenly the energy
Yeah.
is there, but everyone has this different flow. So
Mm.
yeah.
There's something ancient about that too. If we think about the way that we've evolved as humans, I mean, there's something about that is more in alignment with, the seasons and with nature and with our bodies. And, if, getting out of our comfort zone and but also being able to adapt to different scenarios and seasons of life. And, this is so much of what's going on with Mars in Taurus approaching Uranus in the North Node. It's like being able to be in a place of discomfort, comfortably, if that's even possible. It's like,
Mm.
that's the big paradox, I think, of this moment. And especially as we're entering Leo season, squaring Saturn, it's just, there's going to be a sacrifice. There's always a sacrifice when Saturn's involved. And this new moon in Leo is, we're really going to have to come back down to the basics, the simplicity of what is of essence for us now. And the next lunation cycle, the next full moon, will be conjoined with Saturn. So whatever these sacrifices are that are being, that we're being called to make at this time, working with Saturn's medicine and really accepting and honoring those sacrifices that are coming up now are just going to give us even more internal authority, even more internal capacity to move through the coming weeks and months ahead. So,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I love you brought this into the conversation already because I guess that's what I was really feeling like, oh, there's something big happening right now in the stripping back. And yeah, I want to have this conversation with you right now about what's happening astrologically in relation to that because I've been really getting that, like, to share an update with the listeners. The last month I just like got called out on this deep adventure into nature, remote location for 10 days with my partner over the solstice. Came out of that, went straight into a week-long vision quest ceremony supporting a friend. And then came out of that and went to come back to business just before I'd, signed a couple of new clients and, one was a painful and then they just disappeared. Like strangely, I was locked out of my work emails and these last weeks have just been like this whole redirection and, stripping away maybe what still does bring me joy, but not what brings me the most joy. Like life is getting stripped back to, even though you're really good at this and you're still passionate about it and you love it and it's still aligned, it's still not fully aligned. Where are you not focusing on your highest alignment? And how can we create space now? Because at first it's like, you go into victim, this word around like sacrificing, like you said, just seems to immediately for most people have this pain attached to it. But I've really, in this experience in the
that's a
last
good
week,
point.
been embracing the beauty of sacrifice.
Right.
Sacrifice means like clearing out, like, it's like killing something off to create space for new life or life that needs more nurturing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you raised that point about the word sacrifice because I guess I should distinguish between sacrifice that is chosen, like a willing sacrifice, is a very different feeling than a sacrifice that's imposed.
Mm.
And I think that, Leo season, with the Mercury and the moon, the new moon, so obviously the sun and the moon in Leo, squaring these planets in Taurus, Mars and Uranus, it's like, and the North Node, intensifying it all. It's just, making that sacrifice willingly. And sacrifice, maybe not even the right word, but, it's kind of like the price that we pay for being authentic, and showing up authentically. It's like, it isn't going to vibe with everyone. And
Mm.
that's a sacrifice. It's like you show up as you are, like as you said, perhaps late more often than not, and that's not going to really be everyone's favorite thing. But it's a sacrifice that you know who you are, and that's what's aligned for you, and you feel right about that. And so that's sort of what I mean by sacrifice. It can be quite subtle.
Yeah, these little tiny sacrifices. And this is, I feel very relevant to the current themes that you're bringing up. Yeah, these little tiny sacrifices we make in order to be the truth of who we are in the world, in order
Yeah.
to follow our heart in the world. Yeah, do we sacrifice, oh, this what this person is going to think about me, or
Mm.
and always looking at, the sacrifice should only come for, the for the price of receiving more joy in your life.
Right.
It's like getting out of the more pleasing ways, or what's more rewarding for me. The
Yes.
reward, the greatest reward we can be striving towards still is what is bringing more joy to the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's another like astrology influence coming up that this actually reminds me of. It's going to be tomorrow, but um
So
it's
that's
Venus.
for those, so that would be the 26th of July.
Yeah, 26th of July, but they're two slower moving planets, so it's gradual, and we've likely already been feeling it up to this point, and we'll continue to feel it through the rest of the month of July. But Venus squaring Jupiter, because you know, it's like Venus in Cancer. I've been thinking about this transit and feeling into it. Venus in Cancer squaring Jupiter in Aries, and it reminds me of, like, you were talking about people pleasing, and it's like being given something that you don't really want, like this big, grandiose thing that's like you didn't really ask for, or but it's like, sure, okay, it's like stuff like that lately. I don't know if anything like that's been coming in for you, but um I've been thinking a lot about gift giving and like this idea of inheritance as well, because I've been hearing a lot of things lately from people who, I mean, so many people, like in general on the whole planet, have experienced death and loss, since the pandemic. And I've been hearing these really wild, kind of horrific stories of what people have had to inherit from people who've died quite suddenly. And I was just thinking about this transit of Venus squaring Jupiter, and how desperately we need to reframe consensual inheritance.
Mm.
Like, I mean, because what we inherit is, no one asks for what they inherit. They don't consent to it. And if the person who passes away, I mean, I've heard of a fair amount of people I'm close with who've inherited a mess that they've
Mm.
had to clean up. And so, when we start talking about simplifying and stripping back, it's like really going down to the essence of what is important in life, and like how we're actually doing that and showing up for it.
Yeah, well, even, you did ask me a question, with these realignments and things that are happening in my life at the moment, what's driving me to focus on this podcast? And I was like, the passion. It's like this,
Mm.
and like I've been coming to the realization how, I was still running this program in my life where I sacrifice the creative things that bring me the most passion still for the other things, on an unconscious level that feel like they provide more.
Mm.
But what actually is providing, what are you actually being provided with when you're
Hmm.
sacrificing what your passion is?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're giving for, like us from us, such a higher place, right, than just the individual. And this is like comes back to, I think, this new paradigm, this idea of, getting away from patriarchy a bit, and it being less individualistic and more about like, okay, what am I offering? Like, how am I, because we have this false notion of it being selfish for us to pursue what we're passionate about.
Mm.
That's something that, I don't know, it has all these strange, associations that just aren't true.
Hmm.
But in fact, it is the thing that we all need, and that will make this whole transition, this massive pivotal point we're in as a civilization, much easier to navigate for everyone.
Absolutely. And I think it's like one of the deepest wounds of humanity that everyone carries in some way.
Mm.
Even, those people that are living a passion-filled creative life still tend to be the ones that feel still like they're in more scarcity in some way. And
Yeah.
I think it's shifting this way. We were touching a bit before we started recording this episode on what's shifting in the way that we receive nourishment and resource from the world around us. For so long, we've
You're
been,
right.
we're provided our resource and our nourishment through, our food or the things, the way that we travel, all of these things is our resource, but actually it's like, there's magical realms beyond us, energetic realms beyond
Hmm.
us, where our greatest resource is being in our highest energy.
Yeah.
And then we can strip back beyond those illusions and see how much we are actually provided for, or how much that our passion can provide for us when we fully trust it and we
Yeah.
allow it to bring us that aliveness and that enrichment in our lives. It's the greatest. We need food and water and shelter and transport and these things in our modern world. But the true, like
Yeah.
for me, I don't feel truly nourished in my life until I'm doing the things that light me up. And yeah, that's been a big
Mm,
reminder for me lately.
absolutely. I was just reminded of a bit like this theme of sacrifice on like a larger scale, and kind of in the vein of what we're talking about. And as you were speaking, this was coming in. I was thinking about it may sound like a little bit of a departure, but just trust, stay
Mhm.
with me. I was thinking about I was traveling through Europe when I was in college. And I remember we had to fly through Stockholm airport. And I remember like being in that airport was, I don't know if you've been to Stockholm, Lauren.
No, I
Have you?
haven't. No.
I just was in the airport briefly, and it was so incredibly beautiful. And like, it's like IKEA basically. Like, we all know IKEA, but everybody was quiet and it was just so gorgeous. And I remember putting it together later on that so much of Scandinavian like design, so like IKEA design and like all that beautiful design aesthetic and like living quality, it's because they weren't ever involved in wars very much.
Mm.
And it's like their standard of living is so much higher because they've sacrificed involvement in that kind of conflict. And all of those resources have instead gone into their considerations about the way that they live. And I just think that that's such a beautiful example of like a real life example of like what can happen when we turn toward prioritizing differently and stripping away involvement from things that may not be that necessary or beneficial to be engaging with anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it affects us so much on, an individual level when we are so focused on, I think we mentioned this in one of the previous podcasts we did together.
Mm,
It's, yeah, that wherever we're focusing on and wherever we're directing our attention, that's affecting, the way that we operate as an individual as well. And so, yeah, there's
right.
always this dance between, especially people that are listening to this that have a desire to be change makers in some way, which I feel a lot of illusion around this kind of concept of changing the world is shattering a lot too, because it's like,
Mm,
yes, there's this awareness of what's happening on a global level, but does that really serve us in tuning into the way of being that's right for us? And I feel, yeah, that there is, you might want to share a bit more about this astrologically. There
mm.
is big changes expected and big things that are still going to be disrupting the world as more of the old ways collapse for us to create these new ways.
Yeah.
So there is this beauty in actually taking that time to get away from it all and see what is your truth in the way that you want to create, which was one experience I had going out to this remote location recently. It's like you go out there with just what you have in your backpack, a small amount of
Mm,
resources out there, but then you create life for your experience there just based on what's around you and find
right.
how, what is the kind of environment you create for yourself when you're not worried about what's affecting you and what the circumstances are and all this stress and worry that stops us from thriving.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's definitely more complex, I think, in certain scenarios where, people have more family and and job and sort of just different life circumstances that prevent them from being able to go out and into a situation like that, of course. But there's so many different ways that we can choose to do what you're talking about. It doesn't have to look like that. Like it doesn't, there's just a million other ways that we can find this place of being able to change. Change is very difficult for us as humans. Like no one on an individual level or globally is really that great at it. And so we just have to remember this about ourselves with kindness and gentleness, and to understand that we are going through such deep change, and it is extremely activating for everyone. And as you said, the old structures are crumbling, and there's a lot of disappointment in the things that have kind of been in place up until this point, and a lot of disgust. But as you said, if we can just see through that and through the sort of polarity that's being presented to us, and transcend this dualistic nature of reacting, which is historically, that's what happens whenever there's a lot of change. I mean, that's why the Revolutionary War happened just after a tremendous amount of innovation with electricity and with various advancements that just changed the way everyone was living. And whenever that happens, it's very divisive. There are people who want things to stay the same, and there are people who want things to change, and it's very hard to find middle ground. So, I mean, hopefully it doesn't eventuate into that at this stage. But we just have to be aware that this is sort of the scenario that we're in, and that it's temporary, and it's all part of the process, and that there is more to be experienced within it than just these loud kind of black and white extremes.
I love also that in that sharing, you give me that little moment of reality check of what experience I'm having here in Australia in far north Queensland, with how I'm seeing these energetic shifts affect my life, because in particular this last year has been so much of that stripping back to simplicity. And I've had this really, deep experiences with nature that I know the majority of the population, it's not their journey to follow that. But there's something in that, journey for me that I then get to share the wisdom from. And yeah, it's been, but still, as someone who had lived a modern lifestyle and lived in cities and different places around the world, it's still this big, slap in the face of what true abundance really means, and what it truly means to have everything you need, yet still have desires for other things, but still know on that base level you have what you need. So that's been a big lesson for me. But I know for you now, and this is why it's really powerful doing this collaboration, we get to have these different voices from one part of the planet to another at, I'm sure different times as things evolve for both of us. So yeah, I'd love to hear your reflections of how you've seen this energy is really working over there in the US.
Yeah, as you were describing that, I was thinking about what was coming in was the Australia's chart. Actually, Taurus is the fourth house. So like the foundational part of, the country. And I find that this is really interesting to compare with the US chart, which the US's chart's fourth house is Pisces. And it's so funny because in the US, it's like, bring, give us your poor, you're tired, you're hungry, like let everyone in, like everything, everybody in from, the places that the US is comfortable with. And then, from the places that the US isn't comfortable with, it goes into the protective sort of Cancerian like stellium of like, no, we're having to keep it safe. No one's allowed in. But it's this funny thing that's very different on the Oz chart, because fourth house Taurus is kind of like what you're talking about, and especially with Uranus there in the North Node, of it probably is more in alignment in Australia, I think, to go back to this simplicity in the ways that you're describing that you've experienced in life, because that makes sense on the chart as a nation as well. Whereas in the States, it's like, and of course I'm making broad strokes here. There's obviously, I'm sure, lots of exceptions, but one way that I noticed this fourth house differentiation of Pisces Taurus is whenever I'm flying into or out of Australia. Like, in Australia, they're very strict about, like, you can't bring in any, like, things of the earth, which is so funny because that's like the fourth house. They're just very, it's all about the physical, but in the States, it's like if you go in, they don't really, it's all quite loose, like on flights anyway, when it comes to border, customs and border stuff. With developing countries, it's different. But anyway, I just think that's such a funny comparison, just on a national level that's been coming in for me.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because there is that really strong, connection to the land and slowing down here. And we were
Yes.
saying at the start of this call how, Australians, we don't necessarily like stress about how time's getting on so much. I mean, we have,
Yeah.
still in the major cities, it's, a thing, but generally it's a bit slower.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. But yeah, I've just been it's been really interesting over here. The differences in, gosh, every way imaginable, really. What was the question you asked me? Bring me
Yeah, I
back.
suppose like with, these particular astrological themes that we've been bringing into the conversation so far, what's showing up for you over there? I'm always curious, what's really coming in other parts of the world and how we're all growing and evolving together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because it's, I mean, tragic in a way because, this last full moon in Capricorn, I think I mentioned this to you. It was, the moon in Capricorn in its sign, in its fall sign, it's not, doesn't do very well there, or in its detriment rather. It was
Just
in it
laughing
on,
with my natal moon in Capricorn. I know.
which, detriment isn't necessarily a bad thing. People, like, when you have planets in your chart, anyone, in their detriment, it just means that you're like really creatively skilled at embodying that part of yourself in your life, because it is something that's like a place of, it's like a creative opportunity, right? When it's in a natal placement. But with a transit, it can really highlight things in a more, just like an acute way. It's like a glimpse into some other level of truth that we, especially for a full moon, of course. So but it was on the US's Pluto, very close to it, and it was just this moment of like, no one has really what they need over here. We're involved in all these wars and all these things overseas, but when it comes to everyone here in the country, there's just so much that's gotten ignored and neglected, and it's really a bit painful to witness. But and it's interesting, the fourth house Pisces, US's fourth house, and now, Biden has COVID. I don't know if anyone's heard about this. It hasn't actually been that highly publicized, but he got COVID a couple of days ago, and it's just this fourth house Pisces, like he's, and also, Neptune in the 10th house. I've been thinking a lot about this Pisces Virgo axis, and lately, and especially over here, and how the US's Neptune is in Virgo, opposing Neptune in the sky right now. And it's just, Neptune in Virgo, it's kind of like all the administrative stuff I was speaking to you about before we began the podcast, about just trying to get things in place. And it's just going round and round in circles and trying to get the right administrative stuff for the next thing and the next thing. And I don't know, there's just a lot of chaos. And, Biden going overseas and being very, interactive with other world leaders and showing everyone how, we're beyond COVID, and then, getting COVID. It's a very karmic moment, like for the US, I have to say.
Yeah. I feel like just that the essence of that story is kind of what's happening for a lot of people at the moment.
Yeah, it
I
is.
thought I was over that. Never mind.
Yeah, back in bed.
Yeah.
Totally. It actually reminds me, going back to you, to that transit of Venus square Jupiter. It's like in Aries, it's like just that idea of like, oh yeah, like this is fine. I feel good. And then, oh, this was actually way too much.
Mm.
Whoops.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just this great realignment that is happening,
Mm,
recalibration on so many levels in so many ways.
yes. And no one gets to dodge the bullet, not even Biden, not even the president.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was reflecting on when you were talking about, the time around the Capricorn full moon, they were just,
Mm,
being in Cancer Sun as well, like it
hmm.
just felt like there was so many deep lessons around, how we're not nourished, or how we feel like we're not nourished by the mother because we're not nourishing mother.
Yeah,
It's like that backlash.
absolutely.
It's like when you don't nourish
Hmm.
mother that
I
takes
love
care of
that.
you, then you don't
Yeah,
get what you need. You
yeah,
don't get what you need, and now it's almost like this,
that's right.
this week's energy and the in the month ahead, it's like really working on, okay, well, how does the inner child actually identify what it really needs and what's most important, and
Mm,
strip back to find out how where that resource actually comes from.
mm,
That's my little
mm.
download I just had.
Oh, I love it. That is, yeah, wonderful piece to bring in.
Mm.
Yeah, very profound indeed. And especially as we are going forward with the rest of the year, and August is going to really, start with a bang with Mars conjoining Uranus, and then on the 8th of August, Mars will square Saturn. And each time Mars has squared Saturn has been a milestone point in the pandemic. The lockdowns began in 2020 with Mars squaring Saturn, and then the vaccines were distributed at the end of 2020 when Mars squared Saturn. And so these milestones will just continue. And so there will be a new point that we reach with the pandemic, whether we want to or not,
Mm.
early August. And then, of course, we'll have the full moon in Aquarius, August 11th, right after that. And so, yeah, that Aquarius full moon, of course, ruled by Saturn, which will just have squared Mars. So, things are going to kind of slow down, and we're going to get clamped down on. So finding that place of being able to sustain that inner nourishment, that nourishing the mother and the inner child, is such timely wisdom to bring in here in this
Yeah,
moment.
I really feel that. Just, that reminder of when it feels like everything's stripping away, you're losing all that comfort and security. What always brings me
Mhm.
back is like the medicine of creativity, knowing we always have
Yeah.
this ability to create something that brings us joy, even if it's just to bring, to process whatever you're feeling.
Yes.
I always love that, that Leo medicine of creating from the heart and letting that shine onto someone else.
Mm.
Mm.
And sometimes just doing the thing that's the totally a different thing than you would normally do. I don't know. Sometimes, especially in moments like this where we have been kind of entrenched and held down and restricted in a way with what we've been able to do, in certain capacities, and just finding another way to find enjoyment, and choosing for yourself, like, okay, you know and it can be small, it can be subtle, but trusting your gut. This is like Mars and Taurus is, we could really tune into what's landing in the body right now,
Mm. Yeah.
as being able to guide us where we need to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and what just came through for me is like, okay, if we it's almost like if we did have a pre-warning for the start of 2020, how would have we emotionally, physically prepared ourselves on all levels for that?
Yeah.
It's like it feels like we have that window now to do that for ourselves.
Yes. I knew there was a reason I kept saying that to you.
Yeah.
So I just for the listeners, I've just said this a couple of times to Lauren. I don't know where it was even coming from, but that if I would have told her or, anyone in January of 2020 that the whole world was going to lock down in isolation, you'd be like, you're crazy. But that is what happened. And yes, I completely agree. I think we're on the cusp of another moment where
Mm.
we've been through a couple of milestones now that have completely changed and transformed the way that we live.
Mm.
And that all that means is that now we know how to do that.
Yeah.
Like that we have more resilience now. We have more ability to look at how we've moved through those moments in the last couple of years and been fine. Like, it's been challenging, no doubt, but like, as humans, like we can still, there went my phone. That's good. I didn't need it anyway. We stripping away left, right, and center. But yeah, as humans, like we can meet this moment and find whatever we need within ourselves and with the people around us to move through what's coming.
Yeah, because what was the big medicine from, the pandemic period was coming back to the kindness and the support of the human spirit, the ways that we can
Yeah.
create connection even when we feel in disconnection, our ability to innovate. So many people that were
Yes.
innovators and, entrepreneurs and creatives created their greatest successful moments throughout the pandemic because there was no choice but to innovate and to create.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
that's also, go
yeah,
on.
I was going to say as well, and people who had never really gotten into, uh, you know, spiritual and physical, emotional care practices for themselves discovered that for the first time out of necessity and also having the time and resource available to do that. So yeah,
Yeah.
if we can remember the beauty of simplicity and the power of finding the nourishment in the things in life that we can freely create, then that's where we can really have the resilience to get through anything.
That's right. Yeah.
Mm. Well, I feel we've reached a point of completion. Is there anything else that you feel to add to bring to the listeners? I think that was a
Uh,
major point that we just covered there that I really wanted to
mm.
get across in this podcast, but would love to hear if there's anything that you have to add and to your listeners as well to close off.
I think that that's probably about it. For this one, let me just think for a second. Yeah, I think also just keeping in our awareness moving through this new moon in Leo and heading into August, remembering that we always can stay curious about polarity, that polarity is such a strong influence, duality, black and white, good and bad extremes, that it is we are all highly susceptible to it right now. And that's okay. That's part of this process. I just wanted to reiterate it one more time that there is space within duality for us to find curiosity and to find more possibilities, and that's just going to be key. And it kind of circles back to what you're describing of finding this creative outlet, this place where we can always come back to create and to find what we need that's going to nourish us moving forward.
Yes, I love that. And it yeah reminds me of a beautiful piece of wisdom a friend gave to me the other day of just in this time where there's so much polarity and it can really make us question our identity of am I this, am I that, is this
Yeah.
right, is this wrong? Just allow yourself
Correct.
to play in what feels good. None of it
Yes.
just it's about focusing on just playing. We
Mm-hmm.
can't forget this nature of play during this time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, don't let the curiosity turn into desperation for
Yeah.
answers.
Skepticism and cynicism.
Yeah. Yeah. It's being able to have that discerning, and this is Saturn, discerning curiosity. Is it going to serve me to have curiosity in this way about this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Staying with those sorts of inquiries if there's the space and if the availability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and always trusting that joy compass. If something's not feeling right, where am I not
Mhm.
sourcing my joy somewhere that maybe I've been judging in myself or judging in the world around
Yeah,
me? And in this time where, there's uncertainty always, I think,
yeah,
it's something we repeat, oh, it's such uncertain times, but actually it's just showing us the reality of there is actually always uncertainty.
yeah. And
So,
we're getting more, there's just so much more transparency of information available now, which makes things feel really foreboding and like everything's doom and gloom because we know more. But it's actually a good thing. The veil's getting lifted slowly,
mm-hmm.
and it's making the uncertain pieces feel even more uncertain because we are getting selective information, but things will continue to unfold and reveal themselves to us for the rest of this year. So, yeah, just being able to be in that and to know that it's temporary. That is the thing I love about astrology, that it always reminds me that nothing lasts forever. And this is the changing moment that we are in, as always.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing this podcast with me today, and thank you everyone for listening. And yeah, you can check out our details in the notes on both of these shows. Gotta love this new paradigm way of being able to collaborate so easily. And yeah, would love to stay connected, and yeah, hope that we get to have more of these come through soon, Octavia, where we just get the hit. It's time to do another collab. It's just the best way to flow with it.
Definitely, definitely. Thanks so much, Lauren, and thanks to all the listeners. Till next time, stay safe, well, and wise.